Hey everyone, Mr. Wineland here. Just going over section 4 for the progressive era in chapter 9. We've been talking a little bit about this and how it played out during the time of Theodore Roosevelt. So, in the early 20th century, we started to see more an interest in preservation of the country's wilderness. We see writers proclaim the beauty of the landscape, but the desire of preservation clashed during the time with big business, who kind of wanted to not deal with restrictions. Gifford Pinchot was the head of the U.S. Forest Service, which is your answer number 14 under President Roosevelt. He took kind of a middle ground. Yes, he was all about preserving, conservation, wilderness, but also he wanted to. He could be kind of scientifically managed to yield public enjoyment while allowing some private development, some people in there to big business to kind of take care of that area in a sort of a, I guess, privatized way. So Roosevelt and the fellow conservationists favored Pincock's multi-use land program. However, when he left office in 1909, things would kind of change in the commercial development. So Roosevelt was, after winning the election in 1904, um, Roosevelt did not. He pledged to not run again because McKinley, remember, he died within, I don't know, about, was it like 54, over 50 days into his first term. So when Roosevelt took over, he pretty much had almost one full term. Then he got reelected and he did the second term. And then he kind of did the tradition that all presidents do: don't run for a third term. And so but however, before he left, he kind of was bringing William Howard Taft along as Secretary of War to become the next president. And so he kind of handpicked him to kind of run against William Jennings Bryan, nominated by, at the time, by the Democrats. And so under the slogan, vote for Taft for this time, you can vote for Bryan anytime. Taft and the Republicans won with ease in the victory. So, basically in 1908, Republican William Howard Taft wins. Roosevelt has his support. But here's the problem with Taft. Taft, was handpicked by Roosevelt. Roosevelt thought he'd be perfect as a president, would be able to take what he learned under Roosevelt and be able to carry some of these programs. But, Taft wasn't quite the progressive that Roosevelt was. He was very cautious. We do see Taft get a little credit for his successes in busting 90 trusts in a 4-year term. So in some ways, he brings some aspects of Roosevelt to the office, especially when it comes to monopolies, antitrust suits, things like that. But the new president, Taft, did confess in a letter to Roosevelt that he never really felt like the president. He said, when I am addressed as Mr. President, Taft wrote, I turn to see whether you are at my elbow. So he realized that it was hard to replace Roosevelt, that there was a big shadow cast on Taft, and that he was under this pressure, under this umbrella. So he does not really use the presidential bully pulpit to arouse public opinion or kind of subdue, nor could he subdue troublesome members in his own party. So he really didn't have that strong voice to basically really go after some of his opponents and really kind of push down the noise. And so that became a problem. Taft kind of campaigned on a platform of lowering tariffs, staple of the progressive agenda. However, the House did pass the Payne bill, which lowered rates on imported manufactured goods, while the Senate proposed an alternative bill, which was known as the Aldrich bill, and it made fewer cuts and increased many rates. So, unfortunately, that wasn't quite the progressive bill that they had hoped for. But we do see, amid the cries of betrayal from the progressive wing, Taft's side what is known as the PAYNE-ALDRICH tariff, a compromise between the two bills, only moderated the high rates of the Aldrich bill. And so this angered progressives because it didn't go fully into the Payne bill bill, which really focused on more lower tariffs or more lower rates, and so that became, or so not focusing on lowered rates and not lowering them low enough. So also we see Taft. Excuse me, why am I yawning? Taft also angered conservationists too with their appointment of Richard A. Bellinger, a Secretary of Interior, a wealthy lawyer from Seattle who disapproved of conservationist controls of Western lands, removed lands from reserved lists and returned it to public domain. So about a million acres of land was preserved for to be saved, but he allowed business to come in, kind of use that land, excuse me, and kind of ultimately really destroyed the nature of the whole reason for conservationists. And so when Department of Interior official was fired for protesting Bollinger's actions, the fire worker published a muckraking article against Bollinger in Collier's Weekly magazine. Pincock was actually called to testify congressional testimony and accused Bellinger of letting commercial interests exploit the natural resources rightfully belong to the public. Bellinger obviously was upset, turned to Taft for support, and President Taft, instead of siding with Pincock, ended up siding with Bellinger, and that became problematic. So Taft sided with Bellinger and fired Pincock, and this ultimately really made it impossible for him to kind of hold together the Republican Party. There was two wings to it. You had the business side of things and the conservationist progressive side of things, and ultimately progressives who sought change and conservationists who did not. We saw, conservatives. Sorry, not conservationists, conservatives. This ultimately became a big issue during this time because Taft kind of was bringing in more of a conservative viewpoint at this time. So Republican conservatives and progressives are splitting. You're seeing those who are just kind of want to stay traditional, kind of get back to big business. Progressives who basically saw what Roosevelt did, want to continue on, make things better, make changes. Kind of also taking like the populist movement without going like angry, more of like let's solve world's problems, not just trying to solve our own issues. There's a split over the House Speaker Joseph Cannon from Illinois. Cannon really just did not gel with progressives. Cannon from Illinois had done some things that really hurt the party and its ability to really move forward with the progressive. He did not want to go progressive at all, hurting certain bills and abilities, especially with the Payne-ALDRICH tariff bill. So Cannon really weakened the progressive agenda, and so a lot of voters voiced concern over the rising cost of living, the Payne-ALDRICH tariff, believe that Taft was against conservation, and then see Democrats are gaining control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 18 years. So as the Democratic Party is shifting power, so the progressives, the Democratic Party is starting to welcome in some of that change from the progressive movement. So we're kind of seeing a status quo change. In 1912, Roosevelt had decided that he was fed up with Taft and what he was doing, so he ran for a third term as president. Republicans wanted Roosevelt, but Taft had the advantage of being the incumbent, that is, the holder of the office. In June 1912, the Republican convention, we see that certain supporters maneuvered to replace Roosevelt's delegates with Taft delegates and manipulated the nomination process, and ultimately Republican progressives refused to vote and formed a new third party, the Progressive Party, and nominated Roosevelt for president. And the Progressive Party became known as also the Blue Moose Party after Roosevelt's boast that he was as strong as a bull moose. So I don't know if there's an example of a bull moose. As far as I know, they're two different animals, unless I'm wrong on that. Bull Moose Party's platform called for a direct election of senators, so kind of more of a direct election of the senators. Adoption in all states of the initiative of referendum and recall, which we talked a little bit about that ultimately did get passed, and then advocated women's suffrage. for workmen's compensation, an 8-hour workday, minimum wage for women, federal law against child labor, and Federal Trade Commission to regulate business. We do see the split in the Republican ranks handed the Democrats their first real chance at the White House since the election of Grover Cleveland in 1892. So in 1912, the presidential election was put forward, and one candidate, former governor, candidate reform governor of New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson, would step in. We see Governor Woodrow Wilson's leadership. He previously, conservative New Jersey legislator, had passed a host of reform measures. So we see that Wilson, a Democrat, worked with conservative new legislator to help pass things. The Democratic presidential nominee Wilson endorsed progressive platform called for the New Freedom, which demanded a stronger antitrust legislation, banking reform, reduced tariffs. The split between Taft and Roosevelt, former Republican allies, turned nasty during this campaign as both were bickering back and forth about each other. Also, Eugene Debs, which we talked about, I believe, in previous chapters, was a candidate for the Socialist Party. Taft labeled Roosevelt's dangerous, egotistic, while Roosevelt branded Taft as fathead, which Taft was a pretty hefty guy. Anyway, with the brain of a guinea pig. So Wilson did the good, smart thing by getting away from Taft and Roosevelt. Obviously, there was a broken relationship there, nasty politics going back and forth, just mudslinging. And so Wilson just thought, hey, you know what? I'm going to distance myself, let them put themselves down, hurt each other's opportunities to gain new voters, and didn't interfere. Basically, he quietly gloating, don't interfere when your enemy is destroying himself. And so realizing Taft is hurting himself and Roosevelt's not doing himself any favors either. And so Roosevelt and Wilson supported a stronger government role in economic affairs, but differed over strategies, supported government action to supervise big business, but did not oppose all business monopolies. So that was kind of Roosevelt's take. We do see Wilson supported small business and free market competition and characterized all business monopolies as evil. However, what ends up happening is because of Taft and Roosevelt's split, we see Wilson captures only 42% of the popular vote, and he won overwhelming electoral victory and a Democratic majority in Congress. So he didn't win all the popular vote, the master majority of it, but he did win pretty much a good chunk of the electoral college. The third party candidate, Roosevelt, defeated Taft in both popular and electoral votes, but Reform claimed the real victory with more than 75% of the vote going to the Reform candidates, Wilson, Roosevelt, and Debs. In victory, Wilson could claim a mandate to break up trusts and to expand the government's role in social reform. So we see Wilson is able to squeeze by as president of the United States, and we'll talk about his role in the next chapter. So see you then.